Alright, so I've got here the passenger side door, and this is what these doors started out like. I've got the driver's side door pretty well done. I'm gluing in the fuzzies right now, but I think what we'll do is this passenger door is currently untouched. This is how I received this door, this is how it came on the truck, and I think what we'll do is go completely start to finish on the techniques I like to use for restoring a door. Let's start by going over some of the common damages that you see on these old doors. Now, stuff over the years will fall down alongside of the window and work its way down to the bottom of the door. So once we cut this door open, you will see a bunch of organic matter, really, I guess is what it is. It's rotten dirt, leaves, etc. that have fallen down here over the years, and it's worked its way between these two panels. Now this door is in really good shape. Some of these doors can get really bad and you actually have to redo the bottom section here. The other thing is on these 1947 Fords, I think it's 42 through 47, the lower door wiper, you have a piece of rubber that sits against these doors. Well, if this truck sat out in the weather for X amount of years, it also had water and moisture and mud trapped between that piece of rubber and this door. That's why you've got this stripe right here of deterioration. So what we're going to do is we're going to break this door open, we're going to clean up the inside, we're going to treat it with some rust encapsulator, and then actually we're going to do some work on the outside as well as on the inside with some seam sealer, some modern sealers, and rust preventative coatings. So let's get to it. And we should be able to make this door as good as anything modern. On that door, we're going to cut out the bottom area. That's the perfect place to put a kick panel, and it's also going to give us access to the entire bottom side of the door, which would be nearly impossible through here. It would be very difficult to get a caulking gun and a good visual on the bottom part of that door. So if you're going to keep your doors and you're going original and you're going for that original restoration, then this probably wouldn't be a viable option. Mine, it is. I prefer to have good access to the bottom of that door to clean it all up, and I don't mind putting in a removable kick panel in the bottom part of that door. I'm also going to be taking out the original door latching mechanism here, and we're going to be putting in some bear claws. Now these are from Trick Manufacturing, Altman Easy Latch. We're going to install that and go ahead and give our general impression of how that works. And then finally, last but not least, we're going to be putting in all new seals from steel rubber. We've got new wipers for the doors and a new piece of glass. Now this door, this being a California original truck, this door is in very good condition. And a lot of these fasteners just come right out. I mean, they're not seized up or anything. And that might not always be the case, especially on some of those trucks that are coming from Midwest or so. And at that point, I'd probably add a little bit of PB blast for these before I disassemble them. Alright, we'll get these handles off here. The way that these work is you actually have to, they're spring loaded. You got to push them down and drive the pin out. Okay, pull your pin out. Okay, we've got that panel off. Now this door, when I got this door, did not have the panel and it did not have the latch for the door mechanism. And I think what's going to end up happening is when I make the new kick panel for the bottom, I'm going to make a new one of those too, but I'm going to have to map it out. And then we'll cut it out on the CNC table over there, plasma table. And luckily I have that one side to use. It's basically going to be just a mirror of that one side. Now, the reason I didn't do both of these doors at the same time was because I wanted to keep one together as a template for the other. But in hindsight, they're so simple, I could have easily done them both at the same time. We'll get that all cleaned up, primed, and then we'll put on some nice heavy-duty marine grease on there. Alright, first thing we can do is degrease this window mechanism. If you were doing a power window upgrade, then you could just disregard this. I'm keeping the original manual windows, hand crank windows. So we'll get this all cleaned up. Just a little bit of engine degreaser here. Get some of that old lubrication out of here. We'll prime it and then add some fresh lubrication. And if any of these rivets need to be tightened up, we'll tighten those up also. Alright, to get these windows out, there we have it. Now on these window frames you have these screws here, and you have a female side and a male side of that screw, one on each side of the window frame. Those are kind of important. I know you can buy remanufactured ones in stainless steel, but we'll put a little bit of rust blaster on those and see if we can't get them out. Now I've heard on these 1942 to 47 trucks with the steel frame windows that it's possible to go with the 41 frameless glass and gasket kits, and it's a direct fit, and then you can do away with the metal frame if that's your style. Okay, now on the front side of the door you've got your door handle with the square stock that unclicks it, and then on the passenger side of this truck I've got the lock cylinder, and the reason the lock cylinder is on the passenger side is because back in the 40s there was this thing called chivalry where you would unlock the passenger side and let your significant other in first, and then they would open the driver's side for you. But the way to take that out is, if you look right here, there's a little access hole and a pin that you drive out, and then we're going to get this square stock out of here, and this latch will slide down into the door and we can pull it out. Definitely doesn't want to spin. There's the original fuzzies, felt strips, a little worn out. Okay, hopefully you can see down in there. That's basically where the two panels come together. You've got a little tiny valley on that seam there, and it is the perfect catch for dirt, dust, debris, all sorts of stuff. So we cleaned it out, scraped it out, blew it out, and then vacuumed it out very well. And now we're going to wire wheel. You know, if like your outer door skin here was completely destroyed and you had to do a new one, what you would do is, like, let's say you just had to do the bottom section, you cut your seam across the front of the door here, you would take a grinder and you just hit this edge right here until you broke through that flange all the way around, and then basically that front piece would just fall off. Then you'd come through and you'd drill out your spot welds on this back side, and then you'd remove that little tiny piece of the flange, and then you could treat the entire inside of this door with some Por 15. All the edges where you had to weld, you could treat them with a weld-through primer, and then you could put your new piece on. You do your weld here across, and then you would take a hammer and a dolly, and you'd fold that new panel over real nice and gently, and then you could do some spot welds across there, and then where those two pieces came together, you would have protection in there. Alright, just a knotted wire wheel here on the die grinder. So as you can see here, we've uncovered a few holes, just a little bit of Swiss cheese. Now this isn't terrible. If something like this was considered, let's say, stage 4, then I would consider these holes probably about a stage 1. The industry standard for a repair like this would be to cut it out and put in the metal patch panel. What I'm thinking about doing is approaching this from the angle of somebody who maybe wants to do a restoration of a vehicle, but they don't have a lot of tools. Now, a regular body filler is not meant to fill holes like this, especially if the back is exposed to any type of moisture. Once body filler is allowed to absorb moisture, it's game over. It's going to present you with all kinds of problems, all the way up to your top coat, your clear coat, whatever kind of coat you have on your vehicle. Now, there is a company known as UMC that does have a product called all metal fill that is rated for moisture exposure. That would be an option. What we are going to do as a workaround is we're going to pair two products together. We're going to use body filler and we're going to use seam sealer. The seam sealer is going to provide backing for the body filler as well as waterproofing, and then the body filler is going to plug the holes on the outside and give us that nice smooth finish look. Alright, and the other thing that I would like to address at this point is the trick latch. I've got the template here, and I'd like to get this cut now because it's just going to provide that much more access to the inside of the door. And that way we have one more spot we can work through as we do our coatings. I cut this hole here for the trick latch and it gave me perfect access for the old locking mechanism there. I think I'm going to go ahead and just plasma cut that out. Okay, the next step for us here is to scuff up the inside of this door. Reason for that is twofold. We want to provide some tooth for our Por 15 to grab onto, and we also want to remove any type of loose paint or any other debris in here. I'm going to use just these die grinders with an assortment of wire wheels. And we'll be kind of doing all of this blind, but we can occasionally stop what we're doing and then just check progress, make sure we're accomplishing what we set out to. The good thing about these little wire wheels on these die grinders. They're pretty benign. You don't have to really worry about gouging into anything. We don't have to worry about damaging our window rails or the retainer clip for the latch linkage. None of that stuff. Alright, got some acetone here and a big rag. I'm going to saturate this rag and wipe out as much of this door as I possibly can. You know, I'm not super worried about a lot of oil and grease. I didn't introduce any in here, and this thing's old enough that any that was put in here originally has long since migrated out. But I am worried about a lot of this dust and debris that we're picking up. Okay, we'll call that sufficient. Alright, before we start putting coatings inside of this door, there's three things that I would like to plug. One is right here. That was part of the old latching mechanism, and the other two are these holes. These are what held the other part of the latching mechanism. If you're not doing any type of upgrade to the original latching mechanism, there's no reason to fill these. I'm just using an appropriately sized fender washer here, a tack weld, a little piece of metal on the back for backing on the center hole there, and a magnet. That's all that we require. Put that on there. Now unfortunately I'm still running dual shield in this MIG, which isn't ideal for bodywork. Okay, the key here is to do just a couple of tacks and then let it cool back down to ambient temperature and then come back in again, because the last thing we want is a big wrinkle in this door. Alright, I'm going to let that cool, and I'm just going to keep hitting it with some tacks, and I'll show you when I'm all done. Alright, next step here is pour 15. Terrific product, worth every penny. in my opinion. And what we're going to do with this, we're going to take a brush and we're going to brush as far into this door around all these edges and hard to reach areas as we can. Cover as much of that as possible. And then we're going to take just a foam weenie roller and we're going to roll the outer door skin all over the inside, inner door skin all over. And then we're going to come through and put a really nice heavy coat on the bottom inside of this door and on the lower outside of this door. Let that dry, come back, repeat. You know, now maybe you're looking at the inside of this door and the amount of work that it takes to do all this stuff and say, you know what, that door is already 80 years old and it looks pretty good on the inside. And you know, that's probably true. The reason I do this is because if I'm going to invest all the time into fixing this door, and if Henry had originally invested all this time into the bottom of that door, we wouldn't be doing this even in the first place. And if I can hit a little bit of this metal here and prevent my children or my grandchildren or my grandchildren's children from ever having to mess with this again, then you know what? I'll invest the time. So now, you know, I'm not fretting over every single square inch of the inside of this door. Like we said earlier, it's 80 years old and it's only got a little bit of surface rust on it. The bottom of the door did suffer, but the rest of the door is held up pretty well. So we'll go the extra mile, but we won't lose any sleep over the really, really small stuff. Now, just like I did on the other door, I plan on, when I'm spraying this, I'll take the spray gun, or even if I need to, I can use a rattle can also, but I'll take that spray gun and I'll really fog the inside of this door. With material, and that'll really hit a lot of those hard to reach areas. Alright, we're back out here this morning, finished this Pour 15 coat late last night, and I think now that this primer is dry, we'll go ahead and do a little skim coat of some putty, clean up this patch a little bit, same here on the side, and then we'll do another coat of Pour 15 on the inside of the door here. Now, you know, you could do all of this work with your welder and get that all filled in with 100% metal. It's entirely possible, but you know what, this putty, I think people always kind of go, oh man, you know, that has Bondo on it, that's not good. But you know, when you have small repairs like this, Bondo certainly has its place. You obviously don't want to be laying it on 3/4 of an inch thick on a, you know, dented body panel. But when you're fixing small stuff like this glazing putty or Bondo or whatever, it's a must-have in my opinion. Now we want to attack this from all directions and force that in. And then we'll come over and leave it proud and sand it back down to the size we want. Before we can recoat this pour 15, manufacturer recommends scuffing the gloss off of it. I'm just going to be using a Scotch-Brite pad. This is just clean 30 mesh sand, and we're putting a little bit in there because when you start hanging these heavier coatings on there, it's nice to give a little bit of grip to those. And we're not running this through a sprayer, so the sand is of no consequence. One thing I do want to do is move this over though so that we're laying it down horizontally. I think I mentioned it in the last video I did. I like to add 10% by volume of sand. But the other key is to keep it agitated throughout the application because that sand will have a tendency to settle out. Alright, 120 grit. Alright, we've got our holes here, and I've got a little bit of Bondo. I'm just going to push some Bondo in there. The thing with Bondo is it cannot be exposed to moisture or water or anything like that. Meaning it's going to have to be sealed on both sides. So if there was no way for us to work on the back side of these holes, this would be a terrible option because that Bondo would absorb moisture and eventually bubble any of the coatings that we had put over top of it. Since we can access the back side of this and we are going to cover it with seam sealer, this is a viable option. Alright, we did our pour 15 this morning. It's all pretty much dried, and our next step is to put a layer of brushable seam sealer in the bottom of the door here. First thing we want to do is tape the bottom of this door. We're going to cover any pinholes that way, and we're going to cover the front and the rear drain holes. It's basically providing backing for our seam sealer Okay, the brush is ready. We've got our brushable seam sealer here. Almost like a toothpaste-like consistency. Alright, we've got our layer of seam sealer in. We've got 2 layers of undercoating. I think what we'll do is let this dry over the weekend. We'll come back next week and we'll put in a nice heavy layer of sound deadener. DIY sound deadener. It's always helpful in keeping your quart size containers airtight. Alright, this is dried over the weekend. We're going to clean this up a little bit. And I've got the heat lamp underneath. We're going to warm this and then we can put in our sound deadener. Alright, check this out. This is a big bale of microspheres. And what they are is the primary ingredient in sound deadening. I picked up this big bale locally from a Tap Plastics a few years ago. I want to say I paid about $40 for it. I do see this stuff online, but it's sold in smaller quantities than this at a much higher price. It's important to remember that these are bad news if you inhale it. Supposedly it's pretty damaging to your respiratory system. It behaves a lot like a powdered sugar. Alright, it's a little chilly out here. I've got the heater going and the heat lamp there. Our nights have been very cold. Let's check the surface temperature on here. 66, 69. Alright, that puts us in our range. 71. Yep, we're good. Alright, we'll go ahead and mix up a batch of sound deadener. So I've got the propane heater and the heat lamp on this door here, warming it up. And the other night I was working really late on this door and we had a big cold front come in. So I had the door in the shop. I wanted to get one more coat of black paint on it. I had the heaters on it. I brought the temperature of this door up into range. I quick ran outside with it and sprayed it and then brought it right back inside once it was dry enough to handle. And I had terrible adhesion between the 2 coats here. Really didn't turn out that nice and it's flaky. So lesson learned, you know, you can warm it up, spray it and bring it back in, but it cooled down so quick that I think I just, something happened and it really turned out pretty crummy. So I'm gonna have to go through and scuff this up and probably end up reshooting it. I'll melt it with some adhesion promoter and then put the next coat on it, and I'm hoping that saves it. Okay, so on this sound deadener I like to use just a cheap primer. It's a urethane primer made by Valspar for John Deere. And then what we're going to do is we're going to mix 50% by volume of these microspheres in. And it's amazing how you dump those in and immediately it turns clumpy. And you have the inclination to thin it out. but you got to resist that. It's going to eventually mix and you'll get like a cake batter almost consistency. And then I'm going to toss a little bit of sand in because we're going to do multiple coats, and that sand always helps give a little bit of tooth, something to bite onto. Okay, and as I mentioned, these microspheres are not to be trifled with. You don't want to breathe those in, so I'm going to go ahead and put the respirator on. These are the best mixers I found. It's just a 98-cent whisk from the local dollar store. Bend over the end and chuck it up in the drill. This stuff has been hanging out for a few years. You can see it's real lumped up. A lot of that will smooth out, but this is actually the perfect candidate, the perfect medium to use, because it's probably not smart to spray something like this with all this lumpiness and stuff in here, separation. And one very important thing to remember with these microspheres is they are actually hollow glass bubbles, and you can crush them and then they lose their effectiveness. Microspheres are the secret ingredient in a lot of the commercially available sound deadeners, and they're also widely used in fiberglass products to actually lighten the fiberglass. Basically what you are doing is you're adding air into your product. But you do have to be careful that you do not crush them, that you do not break them. You can crush them by over mixing them. You can dissolve them with certain solvents. That's why I use an unactivated urethane paint, and I try not to over stir them. Now I did thicken this batch maybe a little bit too much. I could have probably held off a little bit. It did go in fine, but it was a little bit thick to work with. This is firming up nicely, but it's still a little bit soft. We're not quite there yet. But I think in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and mask this so we can get ready to spray this entire door with some primer. Alright, I brought this over and put it by the heat lamp. This is some Transtar 4167 seam sealer, fast. I'm hoping it's still in good shape. I used it a week ago. I have a partial bottle left, but anyway, I'm going to come through here with a really thin layer of seam sealer across this edge, and that's going to prevent any type of bleeding of rust. You know, if we ever get moisture back here and it does find some raw steel, you get the little streaks of rust. And if we just put a little thin layer of seam sealer across that door seam, that'll prevent that from happening. And then also, we welded in this little patch here, and I didn't weld in this bottom. Reason being, it's really hard to profile this and get it to match. But if we just use a little tiny bit of seam sealer and cover that, it'll blend very nicely. So those are two spots that we're going to hit real quick. Let's get to it. Okay, first things first, we've got to degrease this. Now that seam sealer is rated for direct to metal contact. You really have to watch that. A lot of the seam sealers are not actually rated for direct to metal contact. This particular one is. So we're going to be going over the original paint, but anywhere that the paint has chipped away, we're still okay. Okay, best technique that I've found for this seam sealer is to start with a very thin bead. We're going to tool it over with one of these caulking tools. And if you just keep a little bit of solvent in a can and you dip this in there and then tool, it makes a big difference. So those are two things we're going to keep handy. And we're going to wipe this tool off occasionally with the acetone rag. We're going to work in small sections here. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves. And remember, keep that bead moderate. That wasn't good. They say this stuff is paintable in 5 hours. All that we're trying to do with the seam sealer is give it a nice rounded look, tool it into that corner, and have a nice fillet. We don't want to add any thickness to the metal, especially on the outside of the door where you can really see it once this is a painted surface. Now this stuff does have some flowable properties. Once you tool it in and wait for a second, it does kind of flow out. Just like butter. Gotta get the old gasket out of here. You can see the amount of rust that's built up behind that thing and the dirt that's collected. Okay, that rust converter has pretty much dried on here, but we've got a little tiny bit of sticky residue, and for that we're just going to be using the old Dawn dish soap. I've got a couple tablespoons of degreaser in here. I buy it in bulk. Alright, and then we'll give it a rinse down. Got to keep those filters clean. Okay, for that door, I'm going to go ahead and use this Rustoleum rusty metal oxide primer. The only reason is because you saw what this stuff looked like. This is the only other primer I have on hand, and that stuff was really lumpy. So we'll stick with this stuff, and I'm actually going to spray with the pressure pot gun today. I like the way this primer sprays a little better through that pressure pot. Again, these dollar store whisks, you can't go wrong. Okay, no Japan dryer today. Not necessary. I have enough time that I'll be able to get one more coat on for tonight without the Japan dryer, and then possibly we'll shoot some color tomorrow. 4 parts paint, 1.5 parts reducer, and we'll add some hardener in here. Where did I put my hardener? 1 part hardener here. Paint strainer, very important. Alright, this had the weekend to cure her out, so all we're going to do is come back through. We got to scuff the shine off this, reopen it up, and then we can come back over top with our black. Now during this stage, we're looking for any spots that might need some glazing putty, any drips, runs, or sags that may need to be feathered out, or anything else that may need to be addressed before we shoot our final color. Okay, we've got this whole surface scuffed up, and right here is a prime example of what we're keeping an eye out for at this stage. Little tiny imperfection, and for that we've got some glazing and spot putty. This does not require any activation. Basically it's ready to go right out of the tube. So I'm going to be using that, and I'm going to be using just a small Bondo knife. We'll get a little bit of this on here, and we'll glaze that right over. Alright, and then additionally I've got a very small amount of rust pitting still showing through here on the bottom. The primer has really kind of built up and taken care of a majority of it. We're just going to glaze this with a nice skim coat also. Okay, I don't know if you guys caught that, but I had to rerun 2 of these holes where the plasma failed to arc. I don't know what the deal was with that. I could hear the machine clicking, it was trying to, it just wouldn't fire. But I reran those couple of lines, and it looks like we came out pretty good here. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. I think that'll work. We'll get it cleaned up and painted. Okay, next project. I cut these out so that I could access the insides of the doors. And the exact same thing, I'm going to go ahead and cut out a matching piece for here. I'm going to pre-put my holes in there at probably similar increments to this. Make it aesthetically pleasing. 2 of those, 1 for each door. Coming up next. Alright, we're going to be doing some painting today. I've got these raw door panels mocked up, and I just want to hit them with a really quick coat of rattle can. Now this is some Rust Tough Prime. It's a galvanizing primer. It really dries fast, and I'm just going to hit these with a fog coat, and then we'll come back through with our color coat. That way I don't have to try to mix up an entire batch of oxide primer. That's it. That's all I'm going for. Our color coat will cover the rest. So yesterday, right after I got done spraying this, we had some weather move in, and luckily this had skimmed over. And I'm not sure if you can see, all of those raindrops left a kind of almost like a leopard print pattern on here. Now, I've never actually had this happen I'm really curious to see if I can spray over this and cover that. If this was an actual customer's job, I would definitely bring these back in, sand them, and restart. But since I've never had this happen before, this is personal work, I kind of want to see if we can save this by just respraying it. So let's see what we can do. Alright, we've got our painted door here. I'm going to go ahead and just put in these nut certs here. Okay, we've got the smaller channel with the retainer clip on the top that goes towards the rear of the door. We've got the larger channel with retainer clip that's going to go towards the front of the door. Alright, I've also got these little wedges here that I'm going to put in here. Put a little bit of extra pressure on this. This is just a regular marine grade grease. This stuff really grabs and stays. I don't have to worry about getting it on every single surface here. It should migrate a little bit the more that it gets used. Alright, and here are the doors. I installed them on the truck and made sure they lined up nicely, and then immediately took them off and brought them up here to the attic for storage because I'm working on the cab right now. As you can see, they turned out really nice, and actually I've been looking on eBay, keeping an eye out, and I just found a replacement handle, original handle for my truck. Let's see what it looks like. Just came today. I think that's going to work just fine. Thanks everybody for watching, and you know, this is just one guy's opinion. I figured if somebody else can get one or two pieces of information from this video, then it was worth my time. So appreciate it, guys. If it helped you out at all, leave a thumbs up or leave a comment if there's anything you were wondering about or any tips that you have that could streamline this process for me. Anyway, looking forward to hearing from you guys, and we'll see you on the next one. Just want to do a quick demonstration. Let's just knock on these doors and see what they sound like. Now I understand the truck here is outside and my other one is inside, so not exactly 100%, but listen. Here's my daily driver. So you can see it definitely muffled them down. It doesn't have that real nice ring like the 1953 Chevy does.